The last time I saw somebody as old as I up here, it was John and Mary Phillips, who between the two of them managed to keep the ball rolling. And then Don Irish, who always used to like to wear a T-shirt that said, "This is what 90 looks like," while he was playing tennis. So they set a nice standard for me to try to not drizzle too much into my beard because of I am now coming up on my 86th birthday, and that'll occur on Christmas Eve. And Jesus will have to take a back seat until noon, and then we'll let him have the handle. I want to start out by talking about an idea that got clear to me only a couple of years ago, and then I'll back up to the beginning of my deviation from being a normal human being to some stuff that happened to me that I found very, very useful. And that is that I follow a pantheistic God, pantheistic, everything, pan and in God. So God envelops us, and everything we do is God sponsored in a way. It can't happen without this God. I say that because ahead of that time, I used to have to make distinctions about, well, is this really spiritual or is this a secular issue? Is this psychological or spiritual? And if it's psychological, what am I doing talking about it in a church setting? And now I can look at all of that and say, when a bricklayer lays a brick, it's God-driven. And so it's fair to say the brick builder should be open to what God wants out of this brick. And we can talk about things like that freely. Because as I go forward now, I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on things that border that because they are what happened to me. The first is that my very beginning in life as a religious person, despite the fact that I was raised into the Roman Catholic tradition from the word go, spent most of my life in Catholic school. When I look back to the root, it is the 6 months I spent when I was I was third grade, when I was in third grade with my grandmother and my grandfather from the Swedish side of the family. And the Swedish side of the family had very negative feelings about the Irish side, had very ill thoughts about what it was done over there. And fortunately, the Irish countered in kind and felt the same way about the Swedes. So because of a need of the family, couldn't find housing for all four of us, we two kids, Mary and myself, split up and went out, I to grandma and grandpa, and her to an aunt. Every night, grandma and grandpa, after supper, sat down with their Bibles. 6 months, every night, they sat down with their Bibles and they read their Bibles. They read from different sections of their Bibles because they were just following along where they were in the Bible. And then off and on, one of them would talk to the other about something he or she had heard. And behind them, always in my picture of them, is a huge picture of Jesus standing at the end of the boat in the storm, back there on the stern, with his hands out, trying to have his disciples be calm, and then he is calming the waves. And that's where it starts. Confidence I have, I find, is the confidence I shared with my grandparents back in that time. I just want to give you that as a starting point, because then I'm going to jump about 30 years ahead and things become radically different. But still, through all of that and all of this, I always come back to the fact that I am being held by a God. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to be safe. It doesn't mean I mean bodily safe or economically safe or any of those things. It's going to be as long as I have confidence in that God, the important things are going to be fulfilled. So, from that, when I was about 30 years old, I was a Roman Catholic priest. I was in my about fifth year of doing that. I was ordained at 25. And I had nothing to do this afternoon. And I remembered that down at the Catholic Youth Center, somebody was giving a talk on new models of ministry. And so I didn't, if you're supposed to invite yourself or not, but since I had a Roman collar and it was a Catholic church, I'm safe. So I go down and I sit down, and it's two Episcopal priests, and they're talking about new models of ministry. I cannot remember a thing they said, frankly. But they used a couple of gamey kinds of things to get us involved. Like, you got a letter from the bishop, and the bishop says, I want you to turn the altar that you've just turned around to face the people. I want you to turn it to the back wall. That was the one I was given. And by the way, I read it out loud for the crowd and then did what I would do, which is put it in my back pocket and forget about it. And they were a little surprised at that, but I pointed out that it would be 3 years before the Archbishop visited my parish, so who cared? Anyway, that was the game. And at the end, they said, now we're starting a new workshop that we're running for people for 4 days of intensive training. And it's called the Creative Risk-Taking Workshop. And would anybody like to come? And I thought maybe I would. So I went home, asked my boss, and darn right, I got to go. Well, I am now 30 years old. I have never checked into a motel. That's a starter. I entered the seminary as a freshman in high school and had the vow of celibacy hanging over my head even then. They were interested in where I spent my summertime and that there would not be too many girls around. I was now in a free-flowing 2-sex situation. The first time I'd been in something like that. And then besides, one of the rules was you couldn't identify yourself other than by your first name. Don't tell anybody about your past. You're just here as John. And certainly don't tell them you're a clergyman who deserves a little bit of special attention, because we don't want you to get any special attention. So that's what I entered. And very loose, very frightening because it was very loose. There were not clear rules about how we operate. What we were to do was, over the first 24 hours, formulate what it is we're weak at, and then practice being strong at it. Creative risk-taking was the practice of being strong at that in which you are weak. Well, turned out we had a little inventory we could run, and it turned out that I scored miserably on inner directedness rather than being other directed. And after all, consider that most of my career up until then had been taking orders from people as to, who I should be and what I should be like, and so on and so forth. Inner directed, doing things now instead of later, not postponing. It was like something like 7 out of 10 times would be healthy, and I scored something like 3 out of 10 times in not putting it off, but just going right then and there and doing it. And the last one, surprised the heck out of me, was self-worth. Self-worth. Matter of fact, when I was going through the results of my inventory with one of the instructors, I said, I do not understand that. It does not seem reasonable to me that I'm scoring bad on self-worth. How could that be? I feel very good about myself. And he said, well, it's a very common score for Roman Catholics. And I said, I think I understand. It was about a 2-second illumination. Yeah, because actually we weren't very big on self-worth. You sacrificed yourself for the good of all, and thinking good of yourself was really kind of problematic. So those were the three things that, oh, just one more on that, because I wasn't too sure about him. He was an Episcopalian, and I knew they didn't like us all that much. And so I thought, yeah, I could see where he might rather rapidly decide that I was not uh, worthy of being called a self-worthy person. Uh, So I was in a class at the University of Minnesota, a guy named Alan Anderson, who's a Mormon. I thought Mormons aren't mad at Catholics. So I explained to him in the class uh, what my score had been and said I had been rather surprised at it. And he said, I don't understand why you were surprised at that. You're a Roman Catholic. You score low on self-worth. So there was two of them. You got it right. I score low on self-worth. So I was now about to spend 4 days in a mixed group under the name of John, period, and practice doing things as if I experienced self-worth. And it was a struggle. And the struggle was also helped to continue to be a struggle because it was necessary for us to do that in an environment that was very straightforward about feedback. That's what we were supposed to be, and so you got told. My example of that was that at 2 o'clock in the second morning, 2 a.m., we worked until 2 or 3 in the morning. Not that anybody told us to, but we just were working. So we just kept on working. I was sitting with a woman in a corner somewhere and feeling very valiant because I was helping her because as part of the trade, you help everybody. And she said, John, I wouldn't be here except for the fact, and I thought, she's going to talk about what a wonderful thing I am to her. I wouldn't be here except for the fact that I really pity you. Thanks. So I asked her why she pitied me, and she told me, essentially what she told me is, you really got lousy self-worth. She didn't need to look at my scores in order to find that out. I was behaving like partly by staying up until 2 o'clock in the morning talking to her. So out of all of that pounding, I actually came out of the far end in really very, very good shape. And first of all, uh, I had learned during this that I could be direct and straightforward with my emotions, and people would not only tolerate it, they would appreciate it. Secondly, I know that I could take feedback, like somebody thought that they needed to be kind to me because I was such a miserable human being. I could take that and survive it and be okay. And so as I went out the door, I went with a great feeling of comfort. And I never quite could characterize what that was, how to describe that to people, because I felt powerful, but it wasn't an ugly power. It was just me. Me, I am powerful within my own parameters in my own place. That doesn't mean I can't be corrected. That doesn't mean I can't be redirected. but it does mean I'm in control of my ship. I didn't feel like that coming in. And then recently, in the process of being a Quaker, uh, I learned uh, that George Fox, when he came through his experience, his way of saying it was he felt like Adam before the fall. And I felt, didn't realize it then because I didn't have those words. But now, as I look back at that, that was it. I felt like Adam before the fall. And for about 2 or 3 weeks, I stayed like that. My friends said it was like an electric shock trying to be around me because, I didn't mind telling them what was wrong with them, and nor did I mind telling them what was good with them. They were Roman Catholics. It didn't upset them to be told there was something wrong with them. What really shocked them was to be told that they were really kind of good and you really liked them. Uh, but that was me for about 2.5 weeks. And as I look back on it, what I see is that uh, what was required for me to stay like that was to still be in a group of people that were supporting that behavior. I couldn't keep it going on my own. Now, I didn't know that this was an issue until I woke up one day and said, you're getting to look a little bit too much like the old John, and I don't know what you're going to do about that. And well, I was not the old John anymore, but that's right. The edge of all of that came off, and I was much more like I had been before, except one big thing is I knew what it was like to be like Adam before the fall, even though I didn't have those words, even though I didn't have those words. So that's my experience of creative risk taking. And it was life changing. I think it was the start of my passageway out of the Roman priesthood and back into the secular life. Secular life for me, incidentally, became running creative risk taking labs. As a matter of fact, I went to a couple more because I had needed to be pumped up again. And then finally joined I was in the company and I took a related trade being an organization development person working with teams of people as I helped them learn to be more like uh, I had learned to be on the creative risk-taking land. So the story of creative risk-taking. The second comes right from this and right after it. I told my mother I loved her. Now, in your family, that might not have been a big deal to tell your mother you loved her. Everybody did, huh? In my family, nobody ever said that. Nobody ever said that. As a matter of fact, protestations like that were kind of, not frowned on. I don't know, because nobody ever said don't do it. It's just you didn't do it. That's all. However, I did feel love. And I checked this out when my sister, 3 years younger than me, I was telling her this part of the story, and she said, yes, she said, "Yes, I felt love. We all felt love. Because where our family came from, well, my two parents, was you did it. You didn't talk about it. You did it. And if they can't figure out that you love them because of what you did, uh, well, too bad. But you could figure it out, and I did. I knew that my dad went down in the morning. There's a poem about this written by somebody else. His dad going down early in the morning and restoking the fire. Every morning in winter, he goes down and he restokes the fire. Nobody else is up. Nobody thanks him. Nobody says they love him. Nobody says you love us. But we know it. And that, I got to say, was true. But what happened was I was on my way home from the creative risk-taking lab. I had a passenger with me, and I had to drop him off somewhere, which I did. And I realized there'd been a lot of hugging and warm feelings, and we all spilled out that door after 4 days of intensity. And I realized that I'm telling all these people I love them, nice practice, but I've never told my mother I loved her. So I called her up. It's the day I had to stop and find a payphone. Remember the day? Yes. I had to stop and find a payphone. I called my mother and I said, "Say, I should see you sometime. Probably next weekend." And then the now, not then part of the training came in, and I said, "Matter of fact, I'd kind of like to see you now, and if you don't mind." And then I thought, drop that stuff, you got self-worth. If you don't mind, none of that. I'm coming over now, and I have something very important I want to tell you. So I went over, came through the front door. She and I started crying the minute that we saw each other. And we sat down on the sofa and we talked about how much we loved each other. Then I went out to tell the rest of the family, and they had pretty much found rabbit holes and had disappeared down them because they didn't really, well, it was right? This is the system I came out of. I'm coming back into it quite differently. Should I expect somehow or other that they have got the message? No, they didn't get the message. They did not want this. And I want to say in passing that, at least according to one author, it is this reason that Jesus, if you really read him, comes off relatively anti-family. Jesus was not a family man, because the family was the thing that stuck people from leaping aboard the train that he was trying to run, because they had a family and they had duties and so on. And also early Christianity had the same problem, that you had these couple of wild-eyed people came in and explained what Jesus had taught, and you said, "Hey, really, that's great." And they said, "Okay, now drop everything and come follow us." And the majority of people said, "What? I wasn't prepared for that part. I'm not going to go. But I like your message, and let's see how we can tone this down so it'll work better in a family atmosphere." And that was the gentling that occurred with Christianity, and the gentling that they were prepared to do with me, though I don't know how well that worked, because I had other places to go and other places to be carried. So this is the first one, creative risk-taking, learning about that, learning about myself, getting feedback about it, and becoming really a much more influential, much more open people. My friends during that first 2.5 weeks said it was like electricity being in a room with me, because I don't know, I never asked them what does that mean, but I think I had a hunch. Uh, and then I slid back some, but still had the drive to go that direction and still had some of it left inside me. And then I told my mother I loved her, and one of the great pillars of my ongoing life was that fact had been spoken, and we both were in a beautiful spot because of it. One of my sisters told me once that she asked my mother about, they were talking about life, and my mother said that was the happiest day in her life, and may have been the happiest in mine, though I've had a lot of happy days. Well, the next one is my father, which in that setting never happened. He was in the kitchen pouring himself a drink and didn't give me much more than his back when I came in, and I told him I loved him, and he said, "That's nice." And we went on about it. But that wasn't it. And besides that, with my mother, that was a straightforward statement, but with him, that was a bit of a lie. I mean, I did love them, but that wasn't that simple. So one day I was over, and this would probably be about 5 to 8 years later at their house. And back in the day, I had brown hair and I had a red beard. Now, that doesn't work. But at least you can say, God made me that way. So, it's not my fault. But I had actually tried to improve on the matter and had not succeeded. Sideburns were then in. So I now had brown hair and red sideburns. And I got to admit, it looked pretty awful. So I'm over at their house, and my dad comes walking by me, and on his way past, he says, uh, "Ooh, I just got to notice it's 9:45. Ooh. If I'm going to allow questions, I want to have to speed up, to say the least." Um, Let me take you through this one because it's important. So I said, he said something really derogatory about my beard or my sideburns. So I followed him across the room, and when we got to the far side, I turned him around, backed him against the wall. Actually, I picked him up by the shirt. I can't figure out how I did that because, shirts tend to tear. But I succeeded, and I said, "I have had it with you. I have had it with you, and this is the last you're going to see of me." And I plucked him on the ground and headed for the door, feeling actually quite good. My mother caught me before I got to the door and said, "John, don't do this. Don't do this. Go back to your dad and apologize." So I did. And when I did, I could feel a crunching around my head as if I was just being squeezed by some enormous helmet. Fortunately, I'd had the experience of seeing somebody else go through something like this. So I knew that I was still in the world of normal people in a sense. Not too many had this experience. But what was going on is there's a thing called body armor that we toughen up and hold ourselves in various ways depending on what it is that our problems are. And one of the things I was doing was squeezing the muscles up here in order to deal with self-control and not being too spontaneous and not putting myself in the situation I just had put myself, walking out on my dad. And when I exploded around that, I loosened those muscles. And when I came back, they tightened up again, except now I could actually feel them. Now there's a cure for that. It's called Rolfing. I knew about it, and for some reason I never did it. So for years after that, I had the leftover experience of what it meant to go back on the impulses that are really deep inside you. Well, so that's three. I can't resist. I have to do this. I became a Quaker. You noticed. I became a Quaker, and for years, I've been at this 15 years now, and for the first 10 or so, worship, uh, I had what you would expect. Silence has a good effect on you. It forces you to look at what's going on inside yourself. The more you look, the less starts going on inside yourself. The bad things tend to get set aside just by automatic. That's what happens when you look at them, all of that. And then I decided that Friends General Conference was coming up, and for once I should be a good boy and do what I should, and I would go to Friends General Conference. Except I didn't want to go to any of the talks. So I looked, and there was this thing called extended meeting, 3 hours of silence in the manner of worship. Jorge, the guy who was running it. So I signed up for Jorge and that. At the end of 3 hours, I walked out into a brighter world. I walked out with clear vision about what was going on around me and how lovely it was. And I went back to that day after day for 5 days. And every day I had the same experience of quiet starting inside me in the 3-hour session. And then in the course of the whole 3 hours, coming to the point where I could see the world the way it was, and it was beautiful. I always try to tell people, you know, when we look at the admonition to see God in other people, I don't think that's what the man said. I think what he said was that if you will do like this and become like this, you will see God in other people and you will love them. And that's where that 3-hour session brought me. So at least as climactic as Creative Vista, but more so because it brought me to such a lovely spot, is my experience of that. 2019, I went back again. We were just down south in Iowa. And once again, I signed up, extended meeting, and that's it for another shot, another help. But I've also found, so you know, kid about, I love when I get kidded about going to so many meetings. And I usually respond by saying something like, well, I really need a lot of help. But it isn't that I'm a disaster case. Maybe I was at one time, but I'm not a disaster. But every time I go, I find myself coming back to that spot in the silence, coming back to that spot and then coming out the door with a very clear and beautiful look at what the world is like and a very clear sense of how happy I am to be in it. Okay, how about questions? You guys got any?
Why don't you people raise their hands if they would like to ask a question, and we'll try to keep some order to this. John Andriozzi.
Ah, where is he?
John, you have to unmute. John, you have to unmute.
I sent him the reminder.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yep.
there you go.
John, I was just wondering, as you talked about your grandparents, that you came out of there feeling like you're this thing about held by God and so forth. Was it anything in particular, just their reading and so forth, or what was it that they did?
It's confidence. Some scripture scholars for a while, especially looking at St. Paul's epistles, say that you should not translate it that you should have the faith of Jesus, faith in Jesus, faith in Jesus. It is, you should have the confidence that Jesus had. That's how it should be translated. You should have the confidence that Jesus had. And my first look, or at least my brightest look at what the confidence of Jesus looks like, is those two people and their approach to life and their confidence in Jesus and in God to carry them through safely. Now, I don't know what safely means in this, but, you know, but that's where they were. They may have been expecting a little more than God was prepared to deliver, but they lived in confidence. I'd say they lived in confidence of the bad things too. They had some rough times and they went through them fine. This is God, and you do that. So that was it, John. It was the radiated confidence that what they were involved in was important, and that the master that held them would calm the waves, just as he calmed the waves, they thought. I don't believe that. I think it's a story, but just as he calmed the waves for the disciples in the boat.
Yeah.
Karen,
This is not a question, but a comment, John. You know, in my career as a psychologist, I've attended a lot of encounter groups and different kinds of retreats. And I really related to your saying, you know, like for this 2-week period after, it's almost like you're high, you know. And you said that when you came out of this creative risk-taking thing, you felt powerful and you didn't exactly understand what that was. And the word that came to my mind is authenticity. I think that all of those kinds of experiences are designed to sort of strip away the ego and the pretense and all this other stuff to really open you up to the experience in the moment. And that does feel very powerful. And I think it's very authentic. You know, we get to experience our authentic selves, which we often hide, you know, quite a bit. So anyway, that's what I wanted to share.
Yeah.
yeah,
John, I know there was much more you could have told us and you ran out of time, but could you give us a thumbnail summary of what happened in between in your spiritual development and your spiritual and religious life in between being a Catholic priest and joining up with us?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, I became an atheist or an agnostic, one of them, something like that. And about 2 or 3 years into being that, you know, I had a job and stuff. So I had 2 kids. I had a wife. So I was a busy little fellow. So it wasn't too big in my life, but, you know, for a guy who had dedicated his life to God, to say there isn't one is, you know, that's a pretty good sized move. And one day I said to myself, how come you have confidence that this is going to turn out right? I mean, everything, you know, I did team development, a lot of it. And I would walk into a team of managers and their boss, and people were madder than hell at each other. And that's why I'm hired. You know, they got to really be mad before they hire me. Because the next thing is going to be unpleasant, which is we're going to talk about what we're mad about, and we're going to listen to other people. And I don't really want to do that. I just want to be mad. But anyway, I'd walk in, and the basic thing was this is going to work out. It's going to be terrific. 3 days from now, these guys are going to like each other and gals. So how come? And it's that I had confidence. Confidence in what? Now, it wasn't a God sitting on a pillow in heaven, you know, but it was already, though I didn't know about this picture of the God who is all, but I had that sense that I am part of a powerful flowing stream, and it goes towards the good. And so we're going to make it to the good. I'll give you an example of one of the times where that kind of confidence just snapped into place. I had a client who was, she may have problems with her own self-worth, but we're all going off on a team development session, and she keeps minimizing her role in the thing. You know, and she's the boss, but she's not. And the final minimization is we have gathered on, say, Thursday night. The real job's going to start tomorrow. I've asked her if she'd beat me for breakfast, and we would have the final meeting talking about what it is we're really going to do. And for about the 8th time, she turns me down. She's busy at breakfast. We're going to start this team development session without her input into our plans. So I don't know what the hell I'm going to do. So I go to breakfast, and there sat her two most ardent enemies, the two guys on the team that hate her, just hate her. And I thought, well, she asked for it. I said, guys, we've got to come up with a design. And you're my feedback team. I'll talk to you about what I'm thinking about, and let's us kind of move the marbles around and decide what we're going to do. We built it together. She showed up. We had a marvelous team building. Their plan worked as good as her plan would have worked. And it was confidence. I had confidence there was going to be an answer there. I had confidence in the two guys she hated the most. And by golly, it paid off. So where did I start there? Did I answer a question? And
Oh,
whose question am I answering?
yeah,
Anybody?
yeah, no, I asked, I realized that you ran out of time, but I asked what happened in between
Yeah, so what happened is
and
I
joining the
found out,
Quakers.
okay, I'm okay now, hon, I'm coming back to you. I found out that I had confidence. So what did I have confidence in? So, well, let's see that there's a being behind all this being that is going to continue to develop and going to go towards the good. I'm confident in that. You say, well, didn't some people call that God? Yeah, I guess it did. So I became an Episcopalian. It's kind of like being Roman Catholic, but it's easier. And also my orders were accepted by the Episcopal Church too after, well, no problem. Somebody finally jarred me after a couple of years. So I was both working as an organization development consultant, and then I more and more moved towards exercising my priesthood in the parish ministry. So by the time I found you guys, I was a parish minister. And then, okay, now I repeat the story. By this time, everybody should know this story. I'm trying out Quakers, and Ralph is down about 4 or 5 guys from me. For those of you who don't know Ralph, Ralph is blind. Ralph looks like a prophet, and Ralph stands up to speak. And Ralph says, in St. John's Gospel, it says that Jesus says, I am the truth and the way and the life. You cannot come to the Father except through me. And then he paused. And then he said, my God would not, my Jesus would not say that, and sat down. And I thought, I'm going to become a Quaker. Amen, amen. Yeah. So that was the final step coming in, was to see that kind of solidity in belief that the man was willing to stand against the book that he carried around a lot.
I see a hand up with Maureen Springers.
Hi, this is Aaron with Maureen. We're using her computers. We're having some audio issues. Hi, John. Good to hear your story today. My question comes from a memory of a meeting when you stood up to say something. I gave vocal ministry, and you told a story, a Zen Buddhist story about a time of some monks were meditating, and there was a head monk sitting in a chair, and a man got up from meditating, and he bowed, and he walked over, and he threw the man out of the chair and sat down. And then the other guy sat down, bowed to him, and then proceeded to throw him out of the chair. And they went through this kind of back and forth until eventually they bowed to each other, laughed, and then walked out of the meditation meeting. And I loved that story. And it really seemed very much of your nature to share that story. So I'm just curious about what that story means to you and the spiritual journey.
Yeah, the guy in the chair was a real teacher, and he understood that being in the chair is an artificial thing. Helpful maybe, helps the group operate, but he's not being challenged in his belly button by being thrown out of the chair. And so he's able to play the game and go back and throw the other guy out of the chair. He doesn't care about it. He's loose. And so it's that looseness. Go back to what I've been talking about today. Is it's kind of my battle for freedom, for the inner self to be free and yet be able to survive and be of some use. You hit a certain level of freedom, and you're so far out of it that other people can't figure out where you are. Then, for some people that's fine, but not for me. So it was his having the leader having the kind of freedom to accept that. It was the person who came up having the intestines to challenge the leader and also challenge the whole congregation, because everybody sitting in there is probably shocked that went on.
Hey, Joe and Hobie.
Yeah, thank you. John, I appreciate hearing your story. Thank you very much for sharing it. And it resonates with me in the sense of experiences that you have, and you have this moment of clarity and of passion, if you will, and you're out in the world. And I'm curious, and this betrays my own sense of where I am in my life, right? Middle-aged. My children are starting their own families now. And I think about what it means to help them or others on the journey. Setting aside these issues and these moments of special quietude and reflection, what does it say for how we are in the world to help bring about the kingdom in the secular world when we're out and about, rather than simply by virtue of these special occasions that we have?
Can I say, I don't know if I understand your question.
I think what I'm asking is, what would you suggest or offer as is testimony from your life experience on what these special moments mean for how we should be in the day-to-day, not simply in these special moments, but what it means for us in the day-to-day and the moments when we are with each other, to cultivate this beyond simply these retreats and these sorts of things?
Yeah. Well, I think the retreats are a useful thing. Yes, stop there. I think the retreats are a useful thing. But George gave us the answer. He said, you do the work of the meetings for worship, you do the work of the lengthy retreats, and it shapes you. Now all you do is you go out and you're going to see the world as a lovable place, and you're going to see other people as lovable, and you will love them. That's it. If they want to find out the source of your love, they'll ask you about it. But that's what they should pick up on. They should be saying, hey, how did I get into this? I looked at Roger and I thought, God, I like That's it. You know, I want to be like that. I am like that. I am like that. I want to be more like that. So they meet us in our kindness. Hey, there's a line. They meet us in our kindness.
I wanted to ask if anyone on the phone would like has a question, and if you do, just unmute and go ahead and ask. Doris.
I just want to thank John for this morning. I sat next to you in meeting for quite a while before we could go back to the meeting house. And I just really want to thank you for this morning. I thought it was very interesting for you to share your life with us. Thank you much.
You're quite welcome. It was terrifying. So I accept anything you want to give me. Yeah, I was scared stiff.
John, this is Mary Beth. I
Yep.
was interested in your comment about Rolfing, and I know that you have done yoga. Do you still do these? Do you find those
Yeah.
as spiritual aids? I'm
Uh,
not sure really what Rolfing does.
well, Rolfing is a massage technique, but you're right. Yoga's going the same direction, except it'll start out with the body part, and without even perhaps referring to what's going on deeper that is causing the body part to be like that. But those two things connect together. And one of my dearest friends in this whole game, I don't know if any of you know, Faye Burton operated for a long time, maybe still does, out of the ground floor of St. Mary's Episcopal Church. And she and I became friends when she wanted to know about our attitudes about death, and because a cousin of hers who was very close, grew up in her house, had died. And from there, she led me on to the Advaita, which is one of the places I go for an alternate theory to apply to a situation. In the Advaita, God is awareness, and you are awareness. So you're joining with God as you are God's awareness in this spot. And you can see the ramifications just flow out of that about what you should do and what you should be. And going back to the earlier question, what do you do? Taking that model, I take that model and put it on top of what I'm doing and say, if I were here from the Advaita, I would say, I am awareness, and now I'm going to be aware as God is aware of what's going on around me, and I'm going to react to it. And that's the gift I'm going to bring, is my awareness. What the Quaker says is sink down. What do you sink down into? Awareness. Somewhere there was a question that started that. I hope you're better for it.
Oh, I was just wondering if you were continuing to do these practices, or are there other ways that you are?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. That's why I show up all the time to meeting. Yes. Yeah. Plain and simple. I love being in meeting. It brings me back to where I need to be. And, I have bad ones, and I have half bad ones. I have some terrific ones. But bit by bit by bit by bit, I become clearer about what's going on around me, because I become clearer about what's going on inside me. And there's less going on inside me because a lot of it I have parked in the course of worship. It works. Ta-da.